to translate originally from Assamese to Odia and has 9 books in that because she did not want to go via the major languages like English or Hindi. And this is possible only, in my opinion, if an institution like Sahitya Akademi exists. And thereby Sahitya Akademi has also helped prepare a select group of translators who can translate with both ease and competence literary texts written between 2 languages where no such translators existed before. This to me is something whose significance goes far beyond merely making available to readers in a particular language significant literary works published in other languages. Since literary texts are manifestations of cultural practices of the community that it portrays, these translations help members of other communities understand other cultures better, empathize with them, and help remove prejudices against it, if any. In a country like India that has myriad cultures originating from hundreds of different sources, it is not uncommon to show hostility to others' food habits, manner of dressing, practices of showing affection, etc., etc. Pick up a newspaper any day and there are news items galore informing us of the clashes and cleavages over all of these that try to pull our national fabric apart. Translations of literary books representing different cultural practices help remove such prejudices or at least dilute them significantly, thereby promoting cultural tolerance and even strengthening national unity. How come a simple translation can help in the achieving of such lofty goals, you'd ask? Let us not forget that writers are hidden persuaders and quite effective at that. Maybe it is because of the state, that it is because of this quality that they are hidden persuaders, that states are afraid of them and continue to exile them and ban their writings from time to time. Once a book is banned, you can imagine it cannot be very easily translated as well. Sahitya Akademi, therefore, is fulfilling the objective preeminently by not only taking care of writers and the writings, but also what I call translating India. Let me now briefly present some of the recent trends in translations undertaken and published by Sahitya Akademi during the last few years to discover if there are any new shoots. In 2010 and 11, of the nearly 400 publications, there could be more, but I could get data for these, brought out by Akademi, over 40% were translated texts from various Indian languages and also a few European languages. While most of translations were from and into major languages like English, Hindi, Tamil, Marathi, Bengali, Kannada, there were some from and into other Indian languages. The 2 languages involved in most translations were what I call contiguous languages. I talk of this concept of contiguity, where 2 languages are spoken in nearby geographical areas and there is linguistic overlap, like Hindi, Punjabi, Bengali, Odia, Marathi, Gujarati, or Tamil, Malayalam. Because of geographical proximity of the speakers of these languages, of their belongings to the same language family. The other contiguity is if 2 languages belong to the same language family. That's also a kind of contiguity. It is easier to find translators competent in both languages and cultures if there is this linguistic or geographical contiguity. However, there were translations, and I am speaking of 2010-11 only to begin with, translations from Marathi to Assamese and vice versa. I'll finish. I have about half a page left. Translations from, however, there were translations from Marathi to Assamese, and vice versa, Malayalam and Bengali, Telugu and Gujarati, Punjabi and Tamil, and in one case, Konkani and Sindhi. It is these latter category of translations, namely non-contiguous languages, that to my mind are more significant nationally and will lead to cross-fertilization of cultures, including that of languages. While besides Sahitya Akademi, there are also a number of publishers, private publishers, who are bringing out translated texts, but almost all of them are confining themselves to either English or Hindi or Tamil or Bengali or Marathi, etc., it is because of large number of readers. Because of the large number of readers, these are commercially viable propositions. While the proportion of data between total publications and translated text in 2011 and 12 is similar to the one in 2010 and 11, new shoots are visible. For instance, between Bodo and Bengali. In the earlier session, Rajendra Mishra had talked about the demand is growing from some of these languages. So you have publications which are between Bodo and Bengali, between Manipuri and Rajasthani. Similarly, in 2012 and 13, the Rajasthani into Bengali and Mizo into Bengali, and from Sindhi into Maithili. One may observe here that I am perhaps making too much of a case of translation from one minor language into another. My submission is that these are new shoots that might in the coming years pick up strength and become trends. Also, and to me this is more important than just the effort of that, these efforts, however isolated, are actually reducing the distance between what is called mainstream and periphery of translation. Let me now move on and present to you an additional, I think I would like to stop here by saying that there are other kinds of initiatives that Sahitya Akademi is taking within the major languages. They are encouraging minor works of major writers to be translated, or works within the major languages that have a major dialectal influence on them. And I think that also may pick up as a trend. I thank you for your kind attention.
Hello, can you hear me? Or should I go up there? So just to say that my very stern managing of time led Dr. Naral not to mention the wonderful work he's been doing in his translation from dialects and his prose work on Vilusar Bakaria. And he told me about it, and we'll look forward in the course of the conversation for it to emerge. Thank you for that complex linguistic mapping of contiguous literatures and cultures, and also on telling us about the Sahitya Akademi legacy and the new shoots. Now I'm requesting Harman Kaur to just read out the main points of Mini Krishnan's paper. Mini is written about the publisher's perspective, and she is very sorry she could not make it due to some family reasons.
A publisher's perspective, Mini Krishnan. Having arrived as the language of administration and being not of the land, the way Marathi or Telugu are, English is paradoxically the only language Indians everywhere can lay equal claim to. Therefore, and equally paradoxically, writings in our regional languages become national only via English language translations. I'm not referring to status, only to reach. For 40 years, the only systematic list of translations available in India was what both the regional and central Sahitya Academies produced. All our earliest exposure to our literature in translation came from the selections and productions that leading writers and critics in their language made available. Supporting these lists of fiction, poetry, plays and biography were carefully researched projects of literary criticism and surveys. India in translation on any scale at all is only about 2 centuries old. For thousands of years in our literary history, we had no translation. What we did have was a great deal of energetic bilingualism, which very casually adapted and modified the original work into what suited writers regionally. During colonial times, when the British arranged for translations of our law and philosophy in order to understand and rule us, translation was not the means of knowledge propagation, but rather a means of collecting knowledge and information and using it to control a subject people. The opposite is the case today with literary translation. Almost every language has translators who are working on multiple texts and publishing regularly with nationally networked publishing houses. Translators are in demand. Indian translators into English have to manipulate a powerful cocktail of linguistic influences. One part is made up of those writers who were or are bilingual and are therefore writing in Indian languages with the double force of two languages. Manoj Das in Odia, Girish Karnad in Kannada, Nabanita Dev Sen in Bengali are writers that come to mind. The other part consists of those writers who were either deprived of any language other than their own mother tongue or who consciously avoided contact with any other language. He is writing from the pool of his language. However, even this pool is not pure. In it lie packed the blooms and seeds of materials from other languages that once translated, streamed in and enriched this single language pool. It is not really a one language pool but intra and multilingual. In fact, India's complex response to the impact of Western culture on it represents one of the most important and neglected intellectual developments in the modern world. A comforting snapshot. In the 1990s, there was a paradigm shift with the Ambedkar centenary and the publications arising from the women's movement. This was both attended on and followed by what is popularly called the English translation revolution. Today, there is hardly an English language publisher in India who does not have a footprint in the translation yard. Even Niyogi Books, which started out as publishers of lavish and beautifully produced historical and social documents, has recently developed a list of translations. Katha Publications, Orient Black Swan, Penguin India, HarperCollins India, OUP India, Women Unlimited, Navayana, Zuban, Samya, Rupa Books, Aleph, Speaking Tiger, and most recently it is heard Juggernaut are all preparing translated lists looking to balance chronology and variety. We even have poets translating poets, as in Kulzar translating Tagore. Travelogues, fiction and poetry are all making their way along the great and permanent festival that translations have formed. That this non-stop festival of translation is rooted largely only in and through India shouldn't matter, because the selfie of us with our literature shows that our indigenous literature has not made much of an impact anywhere else. Perhaps that shouldn't disturb us. Let us first take care of each other at home. Worries. However, I have two concerns about the impact and excitement that the translation boom has produced, such as the power of fiction and the grip that famous novelists have on the Indian imagination, that any talk of translations into English begin and end with discussions of short stories or important novels and their writers. Translation seems to have become synonymous with translating fiction. It is central to the idea of Indian literature in the minds of both the popular media and academia. Most of the prizes go to that genre. Yes, fiction. My second worry is that considering that private publishers are drawing both a historical and geographical map, we do not seem to be paying enough attention to non-fiction and almost no attention at all to critical discourse. These form the scaffolding of any serious literary study of a language which we will one day want to read by proxy via translation. A focus on contemporary translations cannot afford to omit non-fiction in the form of biographies, memoirs, and travelogues and literary history. Another concern I have is that the odds are stacked against translation in the consideration of awards like the DSC Prize for Asian Literature or the Man Book International. When these two prizes announce the best writing form, their shortlist is clearly that only works produced originally in English can make it to the top. Tastes and trends. The rise of modern Indian literature in English coincided with nationalist and political ideologies. Produced by the elite, it was a new literature in which colonization and the national movement resulted in a kind of fiction characterized by Western forms of writing and local themes. Was there a tendency to retrieve a lost history, a lost past, and descriptions of traditional culture? Some of the writings seemed to take us into a museum, while the writer positioned herself at a distance. Following this, multinational publishing houses saw a new literary area for investment. Then there is the other and somewhat hidden side of the coin. Today, over 180 universities in India offer courses on English literature. Several creative students of these courses turned to English as a vehicle for their fictional encounter with the India and became the new elite who controlled publishing either directly or indirectly through editorial practices and preferences. Brilliant writers like Kamala Markandeya, Nayanthara Sehgal and Raja Rao did not work to revitalize the Indian language novel, but the Indo-European tradition. Younger faculty today wonder why, after more than 60 years of independence, things have not changed in India as they have in, for instance, Australia, where English literature is not only one of the literatures taught alongside American and Australian. Now, any purpose-driven venture also brings problems. The self-conscious purpose of translation programs is to harvest a literary heritage, one for pleasure and two for an academic understanding of our linguistic and literary tradition. The problem in India, where texts are carried into semi-transparent English, is that the translation has to be made more attractive both to the readers who know a great deal about the Indian language in question and to those who do not, hence a discussion such as the one like ours. Having laboured for many years behind the scenes hoping to see a way into the field, I'm really happy to say that quite recently we broke an iron ceiling in Chennai when the Stella Maris College prescribed D'Souza's Dvipa, translated from Kannada into English by Sushila Punitha for their foundation English. All the heads of the various disciplines approved the text as suitable for their students, both from the point of view of the language and from that of issues vital to land and water use and displacement patterns in rural India. We are discussing impact. Here is impact. Intercultural and interlingual. Of course, older classics like Indulekha and Samskara and plays by Karnad and Tendulkar have been part of the reading list that obliged the English literature class to study Indian writing in English translation, but this is the first time that translations have been adopted for study across disciplines. I'm just going to skip a few. Yeah. More worries. The rush to appear in English is driving writers into taking care to use the kind of language that might be easy to translate. Like the long-standing criticism of Indian writers in English, some regional language writers are creating new works with an eye on translation. They too are moved to put together packages, the environment, same-sex love, communal or religious themes as backgrounds, because these are the indices being sought by panels that look for something other than literary quality when they award prizes. Another snapshot. Could the pursuit of the new be damaging the chances of a historically important list being built? When after nearly a decade of on and off work and hand-holding, a translator who was far from well, OUP published Mohan Prasad's translation of Mahidhara's 1965 novel about the freedom movement, Kolai Getti Nemi, by the title Swarajayam, I was surprised to read the review TBR carried. In his assessment, Parsa Venkateshwara Rao said, "It is difficult to quarrel with Krishnan's project and her choices, but it will be necessary to remember that the modernist moment and the modernist movement have become antiquated a long time ago." This was not a compliment, but if one were to study the history of the novel in Telugu, this novel would certainly be in the reading list. As others see it, we have both in and outside India a readership for India-based books. But are we doing enough? Paul Sharad put it well when he said, "It is one of the ambiguous products of large post-colonial nations such as India that literatures which elsewhere would be perfectly viable national cultural entities with international circulation of translated texts are relegated to regional status. My concern is not only literary writing by way of fiction, poetry and drama, but to repeat what I said earlier, the lack of focus on works of history, sociology, memoirs and biographies." In conclusion, I would like to mention an initiative that the Tunjat Echusakakan Malayalam University, Tirur, Kerala, has just launched to promote the Malayalam language and its literature, supported by an advisory committee. The Vice Chancellor has arranged to publish English translations of 5 to 6 writers' works in Malayalam every year. The plan is to work simultaneously with multiple publishers. The university will subside with these translations by using a certain number of copies of every book. It will also help to promote them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herman, for reading out the paper on Minnie's behalf, and we will tell her we heard it. Now to move to a natural sequel from that enriching and provocative paper, I request Mr. Kalyan Raman to speak of translating the subaltern, initiatives and impact. Based on the rich milieu of Tamil literature, on the translation of Tamil subaltern and Dalit works into English, he searches the connect between socio-historical context and the wider impact. So please,
Thank you.
sir, we look forward.
My topic is translating the subaltern, initiatives and impact. One of the reasons why I chose this topic is in recognition of the fact that not only is India made up of several language communities, but each language community actually has been split into several smaller communities based on based on caste, definitely, and based on their own history, material history, as it were. So they don't share the same history, although they belong to the same language community, and they don't share the same subjectivity, which actually produces literature. This is one of the reasons why we have to look at how the various literatures are produced within a language and the role that translation can potentially play in such a scenario. This is what I'm going to examine. I am a translator, I'm not a publisher, so this is a translator's perspective. I believe that translators are also a category that legitimately participates in such discussions. Okay, now Susan Sontag has succinctly described translation as to translate means many things. Among them, to circulate, to transport, to disseminate, to explain, to make more accessible. So we will look at the translation activity of Indian literature and particularly subaltern literature and see how far it has been able to circulate, transport, disseminate, explain, and to make more accessible, because I believe that this is one of the fault lines of Indian society at this time, in contemporary times as it were. So, in my view, a sensible way of exploring this topic would be to recognize that translation has always been closely tied to the socio-historical context. Which means that at any stage in history, there is something or somebody who is pushing the translation effort, and it serves some purpose which is dominant at that time. The second is describe the conditions under which modern literature and then literary work dealing with subaltern lives and communities came to be written in the Indian languages. So there is a certain history because there is a temporal differentiation between the categories of literature that are produced in Indian languages, as we will see. The third is the context for translating the subaltern in recent decades and the potential impact of such activity. Now, finally, the actual reception of English translations and what may be done to ensure that translated literature, especially subaltern literature, creates a wider impact in society and influences socio-political discourse. Professor Narang said that, translation can do many things. Okay, I mean, that is something that all of us believe in, that it can make people understand each other, knit them, and so on and so on. But we also have to look at what is happening on the ground and see what else requires to be done that it actually accomplishes or it renders real what we believe as the ideal outcome of translation. This is something that we will talk about at the end of my paper. So the translation and the historical context, given its size and linguistic diversity, as well as its history of intra and inter-regional migration, the Indian subcontinent has been served and sustained by translation for over 2 millennia. We spoke about some of this in the inaugural session, of course in a much more scholarly fashion. The activity of translation during any period in history has been guided by the specific contingencies and possibilities of that juncture. Whereas translation was once sponsored by kings, feudal overlords and religious bodies, sponsorship became more democratic in the late Bhakti period when it was carried out by itinerant singers and supported by village communities, as in the case of the devotional poetry of Kabir and Surdas in the 15th and 16th century onwards. During the colonial period, the colonizers translated their own religious and other texts to the Indian languages, which is that, for instance, the first effort to translate the Bible from Latin first and then from Portuguese, I think it took place in the 17th century. They landed in the Coromandel coast and they started this effort. And of course, there was no narrative prose before in Tamil, and therefore so they had to invent the style, and they had to do it largely based on Sanskrit, and therefore they actually took the help of Brahmins the local Brahmins to sort of produce the kind of Tamil which will render the Bible intelligible to actually the subaltern people whom they were trying to evangelize. It's a very interesting history. At the same time, the colonial rulers also translated Indian literary and knowledge texts into European languages, which was also partly to subserve their Orientalist project. I mean, Caldwell is a famous example in the Tamil country to do this. However, translation of modern texts between Indian languages took off only in the middle of the 19th century with the Bengal Renaissance and little afterwards. And, during the flowering of the nationalist movement, it caught fire really. In fact, many of the texts produced by the nationalist leaders were translated into Indian languages, largely through the medium of English, but also otherwise. So, in that sense, the translation between Indian languages in the modern period has one of its major purposes has been to subserve the nationalist project. First to create it and then to sustain it. This is one of the it has been one of the greatest missions, and I believe that the Sahitya Akademi itself is part of that effort. So there is also the fact that modern literary texts in terms of fiction and poetry, with a modern consciousness also began to be produced during this period. That is late 19th century, early 20th century, and so on. So for not only the work of great leaders and thinkers, but also of great writers began to be translated into various Indian languages. One thing I have to say here is that since I'm not a scholar of translation across the Indian languages, I'm only a translator from Tamil to English, so I will base my observations on my experience of the Tamil literary milieu, and of course the experience as someone who translates into English, and then we can sort of extend. I mean, since these linguistic milieus are not that dissimilar in these aspects, we can kind of have a discussion based. I mean, other people can share how their own experience deviates or departs from what I'm going to describe. So bear with me for that. I'm going to talk only about what I know and what I'm able to observe from my positionality. It's Bankim Chatterjee and Sarath Chandra were household names actually in Tamil Nadu. I mean, Ananda Madam and all that was everybody knew it. Every reader, every sort of upper caste reader knew it. In fact, Munshi Premchand's Seva Sadan was not only translated into Tamil, but there was also in 1937 a film was made, a feature film was made called Seva Sadhanam, starring M.S. Subbulakshmi, no less. So in that sense, the twin themes of social reform and nationalism, it was spread through translation across the country, through whatever medium. I mean, cinema was definitely one medium which played a big role, but also translation of literary text. In fact, Subramanya Bharati, for instance, he translated the 5 big essays by Tagore into Tamil. and he was a great admirer of Tagore. So that we have to thank actually the nationalist movement and the kind of ferment and interactions it created, which necessitated translation and a kind of coming together of various language communities. That was the scenario. But once the republic was founded, then each language community went its own way. But it sort of developed its own tradition of its own domain of translation activity, and they reached out not only to the Indian works in Indian languages, but also world literature and so on. So this was the next phase in doing that. So using their own language as a medium, ordinary Indian readers were able to explore other worlds and communities both within and outside India. Now we sort of have to take a detour and look at the trajectory of literary production in post-47 India, when actually the modernist movement in literature sort of flowered, because we were a free country and we were masters of our own fate and so on, which is one of the founding principles of modernism, as it were, and therefore the modernist literature really flourished during that time. But who were the people who were producing this modernist literature? In 1947, our literacy rate across the country was only about 12%. As we all know, this has a certain history, and formal education was restricted to the so-called leisure classes, what in the European sense called the leisure classes, which is the priestly class and the landowning class. So in Tamil Nadu also it was similar. The Brahmins and the Velalas were the most literate and scholarly scholarly communities in Tamil Nadu. Mainly because it was restricted to them. The others simply couldn't afford it. I mean, their material reality prevented them from having access to textual learning, as it were. But this was mitigated to a certain extent with the arrival of colonial education. And even so, it was these classes which took maximum advantage of them, and therefore they were the ones and they also dominated the nationalist movement, and so they were the ones to produce this literature. And they were the ones also to translate from other similar literature being produced in other languages. For instance, V.S. Khandekar was extremely popular in Tamil Nadu in the 50s. Okay, in fact, every one of his novels was serialized in magazines at the same time as it was being done in Marathi. So in the 50s, when I was growing up, we were surrounded by translations not only from other languages but also from Europe and America. In fact, Hemingway, Hermann Hesse, all of it okay, yeah, okay, yeah, 10 minutes. So this is something that so there was a whole lot of translation going on for this. There was also, because it was the Cold War period, there was Dostoevsky and Gorky and the great Russian masters were also being made available in translation to the Tamil population. Now, about 20 years after independence, the expansion of educational opportunities, they created a new class of people who were able to write. And these were the subaltern communities of Tamil Nadu. And so around the late 70s, this branch of literature took off. So you can see that already there's a gap between the two. And the subaltern literature had 5 distinct features. One is that the narrative dealt with, whereas the previous upper caste literature produced by the upper caste, they dealt with individuals and their dilemmas and, the philosophy of living, families, and so on, and social reform, as it were. the subaltern literature that was produced in Tamil Nadu had these characteristics. One is the narratives dealt with social existence of the characters as much as or more than the individual predicaments. Okay, so it was a kind of portrait of social existence, particularly in the villages. The landscape and various aspects of agricultural production and the roles of different communities in the production process were woven into the story. The second is the relation between the various caste groups in the village, not just in production but also in terms of social power and influence. The third is that there was an elaborate description of customs, beliefs, cultural practices of the communities. Also, the local history were also included. These are all being sort of documented and, circulated for reading for the first time in kind of imaginative fiction, in an imaginative way. And then the use of regional dialect in both speech and narrative prose. So this obviously meant that, there was a kind of standardized Tamil language which was developed by the upper caste over the first half of the 20th century. But these people couldn't really use it because it was not their language, and therefore they had to invent a new language and a new style and new cadences to better to portray their own life. And also there were vivid narratives of caste oppression from the subaltern point of view, and that kind of, by their very existence, it served to interrogate the power structure in the rural areas. Poomani, Perumal Murugan and Jayaprakasam were leading exponents of this genre of subaltern fiction. Now, it is fairly well known that the Dalit writing also, even in Tamil, it took off around 1990 with the Ambedkar's birthday centenary celebration. And as in Sharan Kumar Limbale's words, it is that literature which portrays the sorrows, tribulations, slavery, degradation, ridicule and poverty endured by the Dalit. And recognizing the centrality of the human being, this literature is thoroughly saturated with humanity's joys and sorrows. It regards human beings as supreme and leads them towards social revolution. This is Limbale again. So there were a number of very good and skilled writers who came of age during that period and took Dalit writing forward. And it is still going on. Now there was also other subaltern communities like the fishing community, for instance. Jody Cruz, you would have heard of. He won the Sahitya Akademi Award 2 years ago. So he's also produced these multi-generational sagas involving his fishing community, which dates back even to the Sangam period actually. But he's produced a modern narrative with all the attendant conflicts that they face and the struggle for existence and the oppression they suffered as well. So all this is subaltern literature, and it goes on. Now we are talking about translating the subaltern. Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about translating the subaltern. One of the things is that this literature is obviously a product of the political transformation that has taken place since independence and slightly earlier, and it has given these communities for the first time in their history an opportunity to write about themselves, to present their own subjectivities through the textual medium, and it also gives an opportunity for all the communities that make up society, both oppressor and oppressed, to understand each other's subjectivities, and we can possibly lead to some kind of political emancipation. Now, the translation of subaltern writing and its significance is something that, but the thing is that this subaltern literature is still marginal to the mainstream literary production, and it is considered a niche genre. And perhaps, people even think that it is the recipient of many concessions and so on. So that is something that we have to keep in mind. Now, translation of subaltern writing is significant. Now, subaltern writing comes to be translated in English largely as a part of the boom in translation, English translation that happened around 1990. And perhaps there was kind of very targeted funding for Dalit, translation of Dalit and feminist writing, as it were. Okay, fine. Okay, yeah. Okay. So we, sorry. Yeah. Okay, fine. So the main point is that why do we translate subaltern etiquette to English? Because we believe that the most influential, if not the most, discourse happens in English in India. The second thing is that they present a fleshed out subaltern reality which can influence policy discourse and policy making at higher levels. And then it can also teach our metropolitan citizenry a kind of, they know of the rural reality of caste oppression only through news events. But this can give them a picture of a very systematic and ongoing oppression that takes place. So this is actually very vivid, in a literary text. And perhaps it can perhaps improve their response, political response to such a situation. So we should be grateful for all the things. Now the only now we come to impact, but impact we can talk among ourselves because I have something to say about the impact. I believe that the impact of these texts, of the translated text, is very marginal. Okay, I don't see them as being widely read at all. It is something that we talk among ourselves, people, and it sort of gives us gratification. I believe that it is because the discourse about these texts is not only necessary to put these texts out into the public domain, it is also important to have a literary, and not to treat them as just commodities out there in the market or products, but to have a discourse about them. It is the nature of literary text to engender a discourse. But that is extremely weak. Now the thing is that the paradox is that many of these texts, in fact most of these texts have been sort of brilliant successes in their own language community. The moment they are translated into English, they curl up and die, or they become, they fade into obscurity. Why does this happen is something that we have to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very impassioned, very eloquent talk. And some of the points that are remaining are in the paper which is distributed to everybody. And in the subsequent interaction with the audience, we can carry it forward because those were very important points, especially about the outreach. I could now introduce Neeta Gupta. Neeta is a publisher at Yatra Books, as I said. She's going to talk about, again, a publisher's perspective and the perspective of somebody who is trying to create different platforms for translation than their visibility.
Thank you, Namita, and thank you, Sahitya Akademi, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. So, as Namita mentioned, I will be speaking on behalf of, trade publishing. I mean, we've had Professor Narang, who's given us an overview on what Sahitya Akademi has done in the field of translations and the Indian languages. We've had Minnie's paper, which is on her as a translator and as an academic publisher. We've had a view of Mr. Raman on the, on his translating subaltern texts. So I will present to you, some of my experiences roughly in these following points, which is, the initiatives taken in translation industry into the Indian languages, with particular reference to the trade publishing, which is, my choices have been more market-driven then say what the Sahitya Academy or other choices have been. Then a need for a dialogue between the Indian languages, which is something which we've also been trying. Hello? Yeah? Yeah. Is this better? Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah, so the need for translation between Indian languages. Then I'd like to also discuss the growing influence of Indian languages in the digital world. You know, how it's made a difference, the impact of social media, the impact of Twitter, Facebook on the growing influence of Indian languages in that digital space. And also looking at a way forward for Indian language translation sector. So to start with, say Yatra Books, Namita and I co-founded Yatra Books in 2005. And our name Yatra stands for the cross-cultural literary journeys, which includes translation. And we're a multilingual publishing company specializing in original creative writing and high-quality translations into English, Hindi, and Indian regional languages for the emergent internal markets. We've published over 400 titles in English, Hindi, Marathi, Urdu, and this year we're publishing also in Telugu, Odia, Bangla, and we'll also be doing some texts in Kannada. We're trying to find the right partner for that. So these titles have been co-published in collaboration with Penguin Books India, with Dorling Kindersley, with Cambridge University Press India, and since 2012 we've been in a co-publishing partnership with Tata Western. So being linked to these bigger publishing houses has given Yatra the advantages of working on a larger scale, while retaining an autonomous entity has allowed us an independent voice. So apart from these translations that we've published with the larger publishing houses, we also have our own independent list of books which we've published from European languages into English and other Indian languages. And these international translations have been an expensive proposition because you have to buy rights, you have to buy the translations are expensive, and rights for Indian languages are not as expensive as they would be for, say, a European or an English language publisher in the UK or US. But still, these are expensive propositions, and it has helped us to collaborate with institutes in Europe, for instance, key international institutions like Sciences Po for translating Christophe Jaffrelot's into English, for translating a Catalan text into Hindi. We collaborated with the Ramon Llull Institute in Barcelona. We had translation support from TEDA, which is the Turkish Culture Ministry, for translating a series of Turkish translations in Indian languages. And we also collaborated with the Mikhail Prokhorov Foundation in Moscow for translating Himalayan folk tales which were collected by a Russian traveler, Ivan Minayev, in 1875. So we translated these folk tales for the first time from Russian into English, which Namita wrote a beautiful preface for that. So these projects have been possible because we got the funding. So what my point here is that for Indian language translations, for Indian language publishers, smaller publishers like Yatra Books, if there were funding available for these kind of translation works, it might encourage people to take a risk with, works which they're not sure of the markets, available markets for those kind of books. So if we could, open up, maybe provide translation support, if institutions could provide translation support, and if the institutions could also provide some kind of a buyback support initially. I'm not saying completely underwrite translation costs for smaller publishers, but at least provide some kind of a buyback support. Then this, this activity of translating from one Indian language into another Indian language could be taken up by smaller publishers, and maybe they could look at it and push it more through the markets and look at what works. I mean, for instance, at the Bharatiya Anubad Parishad, we have been working towards creating an environment. We are not a very big organization. We've been working very meaningfully in this field, but we have been using whatever resources are available to us to provide a kind of a support system for translators by, say, providing an award system. We've instituted awards for translations in 1987, and initially the Parishad presented awards to Amrita Preetham Harivansha in 87, and then recently we've awarded a translator who has been working translating Hindi works, literary works, into Manipuri. He has not really found a lot of support and grants within his institutions available to him in Manipur, but he has been tirelessly, he has translated the entire works of Premchand into Manipuri, into Meitei, for Meitei readers. So that is something which is really commendable. So the Parishad has been trying to, support this kind of work. And the Bharatiya Anubad Parishad and Yatra books also share a lot of synergy. So while the Parishad concentrates on these academic aspects of translation, Yatra has been dealing with the more commercial aspects of, trade publishing. And in this context of Indian languages, I just wanted to mention that this year we will be launching, in collaboration with Tata Westland, 5 language translations for Amish's Sign of Ikshvaku, into Telugu, Bangla, Marathi, Odia and Hindi. And it's interesting that we have, over the last few years, we have translated Amish into Hindi, and we found that almost 5 lakh copies of his Hindi translations have sold in the markets, and there's more than 24,000 e-books of his Indian language translations have been downloaded via the Daily Hunt app. The reason I'm sharing this information is that it's just to give you an idea that even if it's the popularity of these writers which is bringing this kind of sales figures in the languages, it shows us that readers do exist in the languages, and this kind of, if one is willing to take go that extra mile to tap it, there is a market for translated books. It doesn't have to be supported or necessarily government purchases don't always determine sales of translated literature. In 2015, Yatra Books also published a beautiful Hindi translation of the Chinese Nobel laureate Mo Yan's novella Change as Hum Tum or Wo Truck as part of our independent list of international translations. And this book was in fact launched at the Sahitya Akademi here at the auditorium about 6 months ago. And we found that at the end of that session, when we had a discussion about the translation, there was a clamor from the readers there. There were students from universities, and there was a clamor for translations of such works. More such books like Nobel Prize winning authors, Booker Prize winning authors, and writers who win major European prizes. So we felt that there was a kind of people were hungry for books or for good translations from these authors into Indian languages. So this is something that, of course, Sahitya Akademi has been addressing this issue for a long time, and maybe they need to look at more contemporary lists and, maybe enlarge that list a bit more. The other, point that I wanted to just share with you today is that one of the major issues when we started publishing in 2005 was that the available space for reviewing such translations in the Indian language media was very little. There was hardly any available space for reviewing these kind of translations. Original books, for sure, but reviewing translations in the media was, we felt there was a huge gap. But with the advent of the online and with advent of online forums, bloggers, e-zines, all this has changed. The e-magazines, so these blogs, Facebook, Twitter, etc., have now become major influencers in this field. So I find, I use Facebook a lot to popularize the books that we've been publishing in translation, and Facebook, in fact, has become like a newspaper for me in the morning. Through Facebook, I come to know about other books that have been published, like by DC Books and the translations that they have published in Malayalam. It gives me a sense that, okay, if this book big book works in a Malayalam translation, why don't we look at bringing it into Hindi? Or if Kala Chuvaru in Tamil is publishing a certain author who is unheard of maybe in translation in the Indian languages, I would probably consider that would give me a sense of, what are the kind of books that I should be looking at. So we've been using the social media space and the digital space to our advantage, and in fact with the publication of Hamtum and or Votrak, we did use that space for promoting the book and for creating a publicity buzz around the book, and we found there was a tremendous response from the readers. So people were writing to us, asking us how to buy the book, and that whole online presence of Hindi books, which is a very recent phenomenon. I mean, we've had books by Vani Prakashan recently published Kotha Goi, which was a runaway success because they brought it into the social media space. And Ravish himself, I mean, it's so, and there's, Amitav Kumar has now translated some of his Ravish's Labrek into English. So, we're looking at sort of sharing information, sharing all this. So I feel that media space, the digital media space and the social media space has given the Indian languages a kind of let's say an opening, or we can say, So these, apart from these things, I mean, looking at the way forward, I'm talking again from a private enterprise point of view. One of the ways that Namita and I have been looking at bringing more, the Indian language literatures into the international space has been, by setting up Jaipur Bookmark, which was, an initiative that was set up by the Jaipur Literature Festival 2 years ago. We set up Jaipur Bookmark as a kind of our mandate there is to provide value to the, the literary professionals who are visiting India in January, because with the World Book Fair in Delhi, with the Kolkata Book Fair in Kolkata, with Jaipur Literature Festival, January has become like a hub. It's become like a literary month in the country's literary calendar, and a lot of professionals from across the world are visiting India. So we have created this space, Jaipur Bookmark, where we feel we offer this business environment as well as a very informal environment to publishers, delegations visiting from the US, from the UK. This year we had delegations from Australia, Norway, France, Israel and New Zealand, as well as a lot of key Indian language publishers who had a chance to, sit down together, discuss buying, selling rights, and the possibility of collaborations with each other. And for the first time, we also launched this global rights catalog, which is a select, it's got 8 titles, 8 works on offer for translation from across 6 Indian languages. And this catalog, we will make it available through the year on the Jaipur Literature Festival website, as well as festivals that are, organized in Boulder, as well as here. So just to quickly close, to close this, what I'm trying to say is that, no other platform that I know of provides this kind of a possibility to India, to get to know India's varied cultures, literatures, publishers, and authors in one place. So we just feel that, with this initiative, we hope to begin answering the question that publishers and agents from across the world ask us: how do we get to know Indian literatures, and how do we translate between Indian languages as well as from Indian languages into international languages? So this is our little initiative in this direction, and I'm happy to take questions and discuss it further while we continue this conversation. Thank you.
So we still have a little time. There are so many prominent people in the audience. We'd like a little bit of interaction. But before that, I'd just like to sum up that we've had a practicing translator and an academic. We've had a legacy of the Sahitya Akademi. We've had a private practitioner who's looking at how small publishers are finding the space. I would welcome both questions and very short comments from the audience on the translating process and any particular person they want to direct their questions to. Comments, if they are not too long and if they are pertinent and throw light on some of the subjects we've talked about. Also, those of the panel who have left a few things unsaid could share those as well. So, are there any questions in the audience, or should I ask the panel to begin with the first question? Or the first comment? I think we can take the...
I have a question, in a way, to myself and to all of us. While I presented this case of wonderful work of translation being done by Sahitya Akademi, I still feel that translation from one Indian language to another, particularly from one minor language to another, has still to pick up in a big way. And I think we all need to workshops or whatever, introspect a little on that question. Sahitya Akademi has shown the way. There are some translations that I gave examples of, but I really wonder if it will need another 60, 65 years for that to pick up. So we need to ponder and also link it up with the efforts that private publishers like Yatra are doing. If some support can come from somewhere to showcase to the world also, very significant literature coming out of the minor languages.
Yeah, I would just like to make the final point of my presentation, which I think is very crucial. Yeah, not only outreach. Before that, we have this fairly sizable body of Indian literature in translation available today, and some of the best works. I mean, many of the best works are available in translation, but it doesn't really command the kind of respect that it should. I mean, in the Anglophone sphere in India, for some reason. I have no idea why it is, but it is so. But I think that as a community we should go out there and talk about why these works are important. We can talk about the individual works, we can talk about the genre itself, but because people don't start reading Ashoka Mitra simply because it's available. You also have to tell them who he is and what he is doing and so on. Like Katha, for instance, used to do this back in the 90s, early 90s, where they used to bring out this volume called Wordsmiths, which was really wonderful. They presented some of the senior most writers in India and in Indian languages like Krishna Sokti and Mahashweta Devi and Pratibha Ray and so on. Now, that is the kind of series that we need about the people we are translating. And unless that kind of information is available, the people who normally read in English, they would just, they would just have a cold response to anything that is translated. And it is, as a translator, I'm telling you, it is a serious problem of you're spending a couple of years. Not only me, but the whole community is spending a lot of effort and putting a book out, which is actually a piece of very good literature, and it's being, selling under 500 copies and not being talked about at all. This is a problem that we really have to address, because the potential of these texts and the kind of pleasure that it can give the reader is undeniable. But we are failing in our effort to see, like for instance, Indian writing in English has a community which champions it constantly. I think that if not a community of similar clout and volubility, we should at least, get together and talk about this body of work. That's all I have to say. Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, but I also partly disagree with you, because I do feel optimistic that in the last 5 or 7 years, as Mini Christian's paper pointed out, all the major Indian publishers, who are also commercial publishers, are including it. It is getting, translation is being taken very, very, very seriously. And there are books that are doing well commercially in translation as well and getting their own second life. But I agree it's not enough, of course. But not 60 years, let's say 6 years or 16 years or something like that. Are there any comments from the audience on this or any further questions? Yeah, could we take a mic there? We need a mic too.
You have talked about the quantity of translations available in English, but what about the quality of translation? Because that's also very important. And you have just told about the depressing picture of the impact of translations available. Or not yes. You just spoken about the disappointing picture of the impact that is given by the English translations. So is it not the poor translation that is one of the reasons for this? Because quality of translation is very important. So I think you must tell us something about that. And
I'd also like to, after you speak.
Yeah, I came prepared for this question. In fact, if I wasn't so flustered for lack of time, I would have explained myself. See, I spoke about the lack of conversation about translation, and it includes this, that we don't our milieu doesn't differentiate between good translations and bad translations. In the sense that there is nobody who comes out and says that, okay, in 2015 there were 10 translations published which were brilliant in quality. Nobody says that. Okay, so we really don't know. We can have translations going on for 10 years, 15 years, but this business of.
I'm sure you are not fully familiar with what all gets talked about translation.
No, I'm only talking about the public domain. Okay.
No, public domain we are talking.
Yeah.
We are talking public domain. There is a lot of shifting about translation. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Okay, so there is also the fact that for somehow translation as a genre gets judged by the worst in the genre. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. If good translation can be identified and put out there, then probably people will develop confidence in the genre. But it's very easy to say when there is relatively less conversation about it. It's very easy for somebody who's unsympathetic to say, it's all dross. And it gets said very frequently also. So I think that we really need to talk about the good translations that are published. And talk about them a lot. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so we share your dismay and your thing about quality. But I do feel, for example, Aranav Sinha, because he's a translator and he works with Scrolled In, constantly highlights, and just when I go on social media, I don't know how much you go on social media and whether you're connected to those, it's just a suggestion. There are 5 or 7 sites that are constantly talking about translation. And I would judge when a translation gets a second life, which means that the book in the translated language has its own identity and people are able to relate for it. For example, Benjamin's book, Goat Days, it got that second life, and there are so many, they are not enough, I agree. But I would not be so pessimistic, but optimistic, pessimistic, it's usually better to be pessimistic, I agree, then we can get better than getting self-congratulatory. It's more a positive thing. But what I'm trying to say here to anybody who might be listening, who has a way to make this happen, what I think we need to do is teach literary translation in colleges, in schools. There are so many literature students who are naturally bilingual and who have a sympathy for 2 languages. If they could, and I have tried to float this in a few forums and not been able to, even when he was talking, I was taking notes about how to do this. But we need to teach and have workshops on literary translation, because literary translation involves getting rid of the ego of the translator and learning a certain discipline. Neeta, do you want to say a word on this?
No, just about this. We keep speaking about translations are available from the Indian languages. I think we're also looking at maybe for the younger generation a more contemporary translation. So I think that's also something that we should be looking at. I don't know what you said about that.
For your information, there is not a single department of literature in English and Hindi in the country which doesn't have a compulsory paper on literary translation. This is to cheer you up.
So we will continue this conversation beyond this and figure out, because wherever there are people like in the panel, I have 3 people here who care passionately about translation in different ways. In the audience, 1 or 2 people have left. Many of you are listening at the end of a long day and a long 2-3 days at the Festival of Letters.
Long Festival of Letters, where we have invited 180 people this time. Young and children writers, children themselves. Today we had a function. At this particular segment I want to mention, in the morning I have not mentioned because Namita ji was not there. This idea she had thrown me 2 years back. If you remember when you met me in NBT's meeting, that time she mentioned, why don't you have a a seminar on translation in the festival that will give a, because we regularly organize workshops and symposiums, seminars and so many activities on translation, but we never made as a part of Festival of Letters. So this is what her idea, she gave me some 2 years back. So this time we could able to make it. Yeah, that's what in the morning I mentioned, it will make it as a regular feature in a different style. We are extremely grateful to every one of you since morning because as Namita ji has told, we are all tired. Not just because of this Anuvada translation, because of all other talks, because 3-day seminar we had on Gandhi, Ambedkar and Nehru, very debatable kind of seminar we had, very successful seminar with a good young crowd was there all the 3 days, and of course this event too. Once again thanks to every one of you for making our festival a grand success and also making this translation activity a grand success. And as Namita ji has told, as in the morning also I mentioned, we will make it as a regular feature in our as a part of our festival in the future. Thank you so much and Shubhratri, and we expect the same kind of cooperation to be with the kindly cooperate with the Akademi and be with us. We will do many more good things, at least we can try to do. We are with the writers, that is what our slogan even. And this is the writers' home, we are with the writers. And you also be with us and we will be with you. Thank you all. Good night. कौन आइए
हेलो नहीं अभी करिए
Yeah.